Hello everyone, thank you for joining us in this lesson. Today we'll talk about Struct and how we can incorporate it in our program to create a meaningful piece of software. The subject today is student registration. Struct is just like a tuple with the added benefit of naming the fields inside the structure, unlike tuples where you have to rely on the order of the fields and the types. Let's create a struct. Firstly, you have to use the struct keyword, and let's name it student. We'll open the curly brackets, and then we'll name each field within the struct. So the field name, in this case, it's the name of the student, and I'm going to give it a type of string, and the age of the student, and I'm going to give it the type of I32. Great, now we have a structure to use in our program. This is a student registration program. So let's give the user the option to dynamically enter students in the so-called database. Our database will be just a vector that will hold the number of students with their name and age for the duration of the program. We're not going to persist this cohort of students into a disk. It'll just sit in memory in the vector. As soon as you exit the program, all of that will go. Let's give the user the option to enter the student name and the age from the terminal. If you recall the previous lesson, we used the standard library to read the line from the terminal. Standard IO. Now, the readline function would require a buffer, so let's declare that, mutable buffer, and let's make sure that it's initialized with an empty string. Again, let's find our std in, standard input, readline. Let's put the name of the buffer here. Let's do expect. Error occurred. Save. There you go. So line 9 essentially reads the input from the terminal and puts it into the buffer. Now let's make this a little bit more interesting and declare a student variable by doing something along this line here. So the name would be the buffer that I just got. Let's trim it and let's do a string, and then the age would be, ask the user again to enter the age. So let's try and do that. So if you recall earlier regarding the shadowing, we are just making sure that we're redeclaring this variable so the read line does not append to it. Because if you don't redeclare it or empty it or reinitialize it, read line will continue appending to this buffer variable, and then at line 11 you might get a different value than what you would expect. So at line 11 we'll try and get the age. We need, of course, to convert this to integer. So let's do this real quick. We call the age. We need to make sure that we're strongly typing this variable so the parse function would work. Let's do some trimming. So we remove the carriage return and any space at the beginning if there is any. And then we'll call parse. We need unwrap. So if you notice here, the parameter name and the field name are both called age. So you can explicitly type it like this, age colon age as in key value pair. However, because the field and the parameter are the same, you can just do what we call the field init shorthand and just leave age in there. Brilliant. Let's put some prompts here for the user. So this one will say, please enter student name just copy that real quick. And at line 12, please enter student age. And now let's print the result that we just read from the command line. You entered student and age. Then let's use our student variable, the student name here, and the student age there. Let's save and run this program. Okay, please enter student name. Please enter student age. There you go. So what we've done here, we've filled the student struct with dynamic data that we are entering from the terminal. What if we wanted to enter multiple students, as in register a whole class? Well, if you recall from the previous lessons, we've seen arrays and vectors at line 8. So I'm going to call this one vec students. I'll create a loop here. Every time the user types in the student, we're going to put it in our proverbial database, which is the vector. So let me open the loop body. We'll wrap all this up inside the loop. Let's indent properly here, so it's nice and clean, like this. Vector, students. Now go push to student name equal buffer, and you'll see there is an issue here, right? And this is the problem with renaming things multiple times. So we would need to give buffer a better name at line, let me see here, yeah, at line 15 when we read the name. Let's actually hold it properly and call it name. Let them go buffer. Let's make sure it's trimmed. And finally, maybe we'll just do string function. And then in here, we'll just use the shorthand. Now, if you recall, we also did a for loop. So let's loop through this vector and print all the values that we have. We need the iterator. Let's open the curly brackets. We go println student name and age. Okay, let's save and run this. John 12. There you go. It's now printing the student cohort that I have. It's essentially database, and it starts all over again. Now, because I've declared the vector outside the loop, we should have multiple students if I were to enter it right now. So let's do another student. We'll put Mary, age 13. There you go. And it keeps printing all the students that you've entered. The program works, but the user experience is not that great. We're asking the user to enter data twice in the terminal. Let's try and minimize this and maybe ask the user to enter one line with two different values separated by a comma. So very clear instructions, essentially using name, comma, age, and then we'll try and parse one line. It will minimize our code and it will make the user experience much better. So let's go to line 12 and let's use the buffer that we have here. first things first, I'm going to try and split the buffer on the delimiter, which is the comma, and we'll of course specify this to the user so they are aware that they have to separate those two values by a comma. The way to do this, let me call this one here answers, and I'm just going to give it a vector type of string, because the split function we need to call collect on that, and the collection returns a vector of strings. So let's do that. Buffer split, my delimiter is the comma, and then I'm going to collect, which will create a collection for me in the type of vector and string. Now our instruction needs to be clear to the user. Please enter the student name and age separated by comma. The vector should return two values for us. Let's make sure that the program knows that there are two values. If there is less than that, then we'll exit the program. Now this is a function that you haven't seen before, and it's called Assert. Again, if you came from different programming languages, you would be familiar, but if you haven't seen it, it's essentially a condition that if it is not met, if it is not true, it will exit the program, and it will panic essentially and exit the program. So our assertion here is that the vector answers, its length should be 2. If it's not, then the program will exit entirely. Let me just put the exclamation mark here, since this is a macro. Now let's trim our program. So there's a lot of redundant code that we can get rid of. Let's get rid of line 15 to 17, not needed any longer. We'll use the answers vector, and I'm gonna call index 0 from that vector, because I know that would be the name from the instruction that I gave the user. And for the age, again, I'm going to use the answers vector. I'm going to put the element 1 from that vector, and I'll leave everything else the same. Let me just double check here, line 17. Yep. Okay, all good. Let's save that and run the program. So it's asking me to enter some data, so I'm going to put John, comma, and then I'll put space. You'll see the benefit of trim there. Let's do another one. Okay, so the more data we put, it's saving it correctly into our student's vector. That's it for this lesson. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on the next one, where we will build on top of our structure. We'll introduce some functions to the structure, and we'll complete the program.